Welcome everybody to our 2022 first Janome Club, brought to you by Janome Australia. With this year, we're doing the same sort of format. We're going to be covering feet, functions on your machine. We're going to be looking at some optional accessories, or we might even look at our different ranges of machines. So sometimes it'll be sewing related, sometimes quilting, sometimes embroidery, and software. So we've got the whole gamut. Each month is different for those who haven't joined us before. And today we're going to get right in and started. We're doing the F foot, which is our satin stitch foot, and the variations of the F foot. So if we'll go straight over to this camera here. Okay. So this is our F foot here. We have a 9mm size and we have our 7mm size here. And the 7mm, so the size that the feet are relates to the size of your machine. So the width of the actual foot in here where the needle can swing, this one is 9mm wide. And then this one is 7mm wide. The 7mm feet will also fit on the 5mm, most of the 5mm machines. If you're at all wanting to know what is the right one for your machine, please contact your local Janome Stockist and they'll be able to advise you. So the shank is the same on a lot of our 5mm. It's just that your needle will not swing right to the edges on the 7mm foot. So down the bottom here, we have our standard F feet, which are these two. I might put them together. There's our 9 and 7. And then here on this side, we have our F2 foot. So the main difference with the F2 foot is that it is an open toe. So you can see there is no clear bar. These ones have got, the F foot have got the clear bar at the front with the little center needle position check mark. So that one's a little red, and I think this one's just a little notch in the plastic. And then with the F2 feet, you'll find there's no bar across the front, so you get a little bit better visibility. And the center notch, there's a little notch in the plastic right at the back of the foot here behind the needle. So the reason you would use one foot over the other is if I've got a specific line or edge that I want to follow, I quite often will use the one with the center guideline, because then you have a point of reference in front of the needle which you can follow along. Whereas sometimes if you're maybe appliquing around a shape or having to do corners and things, I quite often like to use the open toe one because it gives you that slightly better visibility. The other foot in our F feet range is our FB foot, and I have a 9mm and a 7mm foot here. The FB foot is the same as your standard F foot, but it has these extra wings on either side, and it has a bit more guidelines on it. So it's called our border guide foot. I get it right, what wording. We have a center needle marking on both the feet. And on the 9mm foot, it also has edge markings for your first row. And then it has from the side of the foot to the first line, and then from this first line to the second line is 9mm. Whereas on the 7mm foot, you'll find from the inside edge of the toes to the first line, and then again from first to second line is a 7mm difference. So the other thing I will show you is I'm just going to flip over this F foot and bring in a standard A foot. So your standard A foot is your zigzag foot. That is your standard utility foot for sewing on all machines. You will see that the back of this foot is very flat. It's got a little raised section just behind where the needle will go when the stitches form, but it's very flat. That gives you the best contact with all of your feed dogs to give you really good feed for when you're seaming pieces together. Whereas if you look at the back of the F foot, you will see these metal guides run down either side, and it is actually sort of slightly cut out through this center section. So it's when the foot sits the right way up, it sits a little bit higher. And what that does is the two bars on either side will make contact with your feed dogs to feed your fabric through, but having that slight cutout as the stitches form means that there's no distortion. It's not getting caught, especially when you're doing a really dense satin stitch. So they're the different F feet and things that we have available. Okay, so let's go over to my machine. And first of all, I'm going to select a decorative stitch. So our decorative stitches and your machine might be slightly different depending on what model you've got. But most of our touchscreen models have got this, I call it a sideways sort of curly heart, and that goes into all your decorative stitches. We can then choose, I might choose a heirloom stitch today, and we might choose this diamond one. So with all of our decorative stitches of the machines that have a lock stitch and also a reverse stitch, they have got slightly different functions for your decorative stitches. So when I'm sewing along and I want to stop at a particular spot, so if I show you here, I don't know if that's in focus okay. So here you can see I stitched my decorative stitches from this seam line down to this seam line. So when I was stitching down here, I wanted the stitches to stop right on that seam line. So that's your reverse button. Your reverse button will stop. Doesn't matter where it is in the pattern, it will just stop and lock off for you. Whereas if I hold up this other little sample here, this one here, I've stitched out one pattern repeat and then a second pattern repeat of this sort of like curly figure eight. When it was halfway through stitching the second curly part, I pressed the lock stitch button. And when the lock stitch button is pressed, it will complete the whole pattern repeat and then lock off. So I'll show you those. We'll do some stitching. So if I start stitching now, I've got my F foot on and I've selected my stitch. So I'm going to start stitching, and then after a little while, I'm going to hit the lock off button and it will repeat one of these diamond patterns for me. So we'll start stitching here. Now, the guide with decorative stitching is that you need to do some sort of stabilization on your fabric. If I was just sewing on a single piece of cotton fabric, it would tunnel, which means that it would actually pull the stitches would actually, is it on this camera over here? The stitches would actually pull in my fabric and cause what we call a tunnel, especially if you're doing like a dense satin stitch.
A little bit.
This way here?
Yeah, that's it.
So what will happen is if I was doing a wide satin stitch there, it would pull my fabric in and tunnel, and then you'll get lovely puckers and, you know, all those horrible things with your fabric. So what I have done with this fabric is I have starched it with a bit of spray, and I have also put some iron-on interfacing on the back. Depending on what you're doing, if it's just a satin stitch, you could use tearaway and just put a slight piece of tearaway underneath. If you're doing a more open decorative stitch, I tend to like using an iron-on stabilizer or interfacing that I would just leave on. Or if you're making, like I've got an example that I'll show you later, say stitching on a garment, I'm going to hit my lock off button now. See the machine, so I'm not touching the machine for anything else. It's slowing down and doing its lock off at the end of its little, you see that there? So what you'll find here is that as it was stitching down, when it got to this last one is where I've hit my lock off button and it has completed that whole diamond. If I just stitch a little bit next to it and we go down, yeah, if I'm doing a garment or something which will be washed later and I don't want to leave interfacing or anything in there, what I tend to use is some sort of iron-on wash away so that it would stabilise my fabric and then it will wash away eventually. I'm going to stop. I'm going to hit my reverse button now. And then if I continue to sew, you'll see all the machine does is do a lock off. We come out here. So can you see this? So here you can see we've come down, it completed the diamond because that was my reverse button. Whereas this one, it stopped halfway through a diamond because I've told it that's where I wanted to stop and it would stop straight away. So that's your reverse and your lock off button with decorative stitches. Now, one of the other things that I quite like using with the decorative stitches, if I've got a machine with a pivot function, is I quite like using it with that. So if I turn my pivot function on, which is the foot up key, and let's choose another stitch, we'll go in here and find a... always too many stitches to choose. Let's find, we'll do this little star one. No, I hit the wrong button. I want that one. Thank you very much. Okay, so now what I'm going to show you is I've drawn on my fabric a curvy line. So I might be appliquing around a shape. I might be just doing some decorative stitching. And what you will find is that as I start, so I've lined up the center of my foot with that little red check mark to my line. So I know exactly where I'm going. My machine will stitch along. And anytime that I feel I need to turn around the curve is I can stop. And what my pivot function has done has now lifted up my foot. You can see this space under here. And that allows me now to pivot my fabric around so that I can keep that line where that, where my drawn line is, the check mark on my little drawn line, so that I'm going to go along this shape. If your machine does not have the pivot function, you may have a knee lift on your machine, so you could utilise that. And with your knee lift is that when your machine stops, you would then move your knee out to the right and that would lift up your foot and allow it to go down. If you have a machine that doesn't have either of those, it'd just be a matter of when you stop at a section is just use your foot lever at the back, lift up your machine, rotate your fabric, put it back down. So you can utilise this F foot as well with a number of our attachments. I'll show you some examples in a minute that I've utilised the circle attachment and the F foot together. Let's just lock off here and I can show you. So there we have, I think that looks okay. Can you see that one okay? Yeah. So I have stitched now my little starry design right on top of that drawn line that I had. So what I'm going to do is swap over to my FB foot to show you that one. So these ones just clip on the bottom of your foot like a lot of your regular feet. Just press the little lever at the back and it will drop off, and then press it again as you're putting the foot up. So with the guide foot, I don't know which camera. Actually, I might show you. I'll take it off first, and I will get a sample. Yeah. And that one look okay? Okay, so if we have a look here, so this is where the FB, the border guide foot, comes into its own. If you want to make your own stitch building, so what I've done is I've drawn a line on my fabric and I've stitched this green sort of diamondy pattern first. So if I put my foot there, you can see, so I would have stitched that. Then when I've come and done the sides, I've lined up the previous row that I've stitched with these guidelines in this first section, or if you wanted a gap, you would obviously move it over again. And then you've got your second row of decorative stitching, and then I've done then a third row. So I've moved it over the third time and done that row of stitching. One of the other things that a lot of our machines have got is a mirror image. So if we look at these stitches here, what you will see is the center one is stitched in the green, and then when we go to this blue stitch, you can see on the, what do we write to you? On the right-hand side, the solid little leaf is sticking off to the outside, and then I've mirror imaged the stitch on the other side to go off to the left. And then the same with the little arc stitch here is that I've done a mirror image. If your machine doesn't have mirror image, you would have to stitch down one side and then back up the other. I'm going to put my foot back on and I will show you this. I'm going to select my stitch. I just have to find the one that I chose before. That's when you've got a lot of selection. If you are ever coming back to something, write down what you used, because this one. There we go. So I've already stitched here a centre stitch and a mirror image of the arced one, and I'm now going to do another one of this rope sort of design. But what I'll do is I'll show you here on the screen. So if I want to do, let me find one that displays really well. I'll do this one for the left and right, so your vertical mirror, and then there's also horizontal mirror available on some stitches. So you can see here, this one is curling around over to the left, and if I hit my mirror image key, it will flip it so that it goes to the right. And then if I choose something like this little vine with leaves that are pointing down, this one I also have the option to mirror image horizontally, and then they would be going up. So it just depends on the model of the machine and the actual stitches. Some stitches you won't have any option to mirror image, or some stitches will only be able to mirror one way or the other. It will be greyed out, not available if you use it. So I'm going to go to this sort of woven sort of stitch. So what I'm doing is I want to sew my next stitch next to where I've done my previous stitching. So I am lining up. I started everything at the top of here. I'm going to put my foot down. So I've got a mark here where I've started all my stitches. So I've lined up the horizontal line on the foot with my start point, and then I've lined up the guides, these guides that are on the foot, with the previous row of stitches that I've sewn. And we can start sewing. Now with decorative stitching, the other thing that I have had a lot of queries about is that people often say that their stitches have distorted a little bit. You will find that as I'm sewing, I am sewing at a slowish, medium sort of speed, and I am not pushing and pulling my fabric. I am literally using my fingertips to make sure I'm guiding my fabric to stay, the previous row will stay in those guidelines. But if you tend to grab the back of your fabric and help pull it through, or you tend to hold on to your fabric at the front, you will find that you will distort your stitches. So it is best just to sew at that sort of medium speed and just let the machines do the work. They will do the work for you. You don't have to help them along. If you find that you're constantly trying to pull your work through your sewing machine, you might need a faster sewing machine. So have a look what else is available, because they do vary in speed from the lower end to higher. I like this stitch building for if I'm making bags and I put it on a strap. These look really lovely, putting the stitches down some heavyweight sort of cotton ribbing or even some stabilized fabric, and then fold up and make a strap. They look really nice. So if we just stop there, and then you will see then I've got this lovely sort of band of stitches. So if I go now to my F2 foot, so this is my open toe foot. And that's just because I quite like having the vision often at the front of the foot so that I can see where I'm going. I'm going to choose a stitch. What shall we do? Let's find a little applique stitch. We're going to choose a right hand. This one looks okay. So I'm lining up this. I've chosen a right hand centered, like a right hand stitch. So I know then my right hand needle position will be the edge of the stitch. So when I am about to start, I can line up my needle with my edge of my little applique piece that I'm doing. So I'm not actually stitching along the center check mark. This is why I like the open toe. So as I stitch this, I have got my pivot function on as well because I'm going around a circle. And I am now watching where my right-hand needle drop position is. I'm not, no, the camera, I don't know whether. I will change this camera in. Let's bring it down. In. Can we see that at all? So I'm not following a particular mark on the foot. What I'm doing is I'm looking where my needle is dropping down, which is on the right-hand side, and I'm lining up that with the edge of my little circle that I'm appliquing on. So this is just raw edge applique. I have used Visor Fix or Heat and Bond and got my little circle here. So you can do, I'm just doing a little blanket stitch on this one. You could use, I'll show you some satin stitch. I'll just stop there. So you can sort of just see there. Come back to this one. Come back to this one. So I was just stitching around this circle, and this is where I wanted my needle drop, so that it wasn't important for me to have that little mark. This is also some satin stitch that I've done. This one was 6 mil and this one was a 3 mil wide. So it doesn't matter what width your stitches are. Let me show you some examples. I'll just move all my feet out of the way. So I'm going to run through a couple of examples at the moment just to show you some other ways that you can utilise this foot. This notebook cover was the accessory of the month in November or December to make a little notebook cover. If you happen to have downloaded it when it first went up, there was a missing step in it, so please go and download it again. And it was just that once you've stitched this main section, you then had to trim it down to size. So the notebook cover uses the F foot, and we've done rows of decorative stitches. And I've also done some monogramming on the machine. And then on this other sample that I've just started, I've actually stitched down the pieces of fabric. So you can see that's when I would use my reverse button to lock off straight away.
There's a question there on
yes, we had a question.
What weight of thread are you using?
I'm currently using a Signature 40 weight variegated cotton thread. I particularly like the slightly heavier weight when I'm doing decorative stitches because I want them to really stand out on the fabric. And the 40 weight I find does sit up on the fabric. If you want to use anything heavier, you have to do like a reverse bobbin work. I do have a sample here. That one out of the way. This was a accessory of the month this was a Create Your World that one of our other educators did, and it will be on Inspiration. If you go to the Inspirations page, you scroll down to the bottom, you'll then see the link to the Create Your World. This one used decorative stitching, plus it did reverse bobbin work with a heavyweight thread. So this is more like a embroidery cotton that you hand wind around your bobbin, and then you actually sew from the wrong side of your work and you can get a heavier sort of stitch there. This one here, you might quite be able to see a little bit of it. This is a sewing machine mat. It's got pockets at the front. I don't know if you can quite see little
This is
clear
project on the
pockets.
website, isn't it?
This is it was a website or a social media project. I'm pretty sure
It's on the website.
Yeah, if it's not on the website under inspirations, then let your local store know, but otherwise it'll be on Facebook because I can't remember with that one. This is another where we've done decorative stitching, and that's just used trying to think. Oh, that might be Wonderful thread. We use all different threads here. This is a little triangle pouch where we've stitched the fabric before we've made up the pouch. So that's another option. And you can see we quite like variegated threads here. They add a lovely element to your decorative stitches. This is a little project that I think will be coming out sometime this year, and it's got placemats and coasters. And you can see here with these circles, we actually used our circle attachment and the F foot together. So you can use your circle attachment. This one is not a project. This was just made by one of our educators. It's a little girl's dress. And what we've done on the bodice is we've done the rows of decorative stitching in a green metallic thread, and then we've done some pin tucking as well. And then down the bottom around the hem of the dress, it's got some monogramming. It says sweet with a little heart, and then there's some larger little tucks. So if you've got a dress pattern or a blouse or anything like that, and you just want to add a little extra element to it, adding some decorative stitching to it is another option. This, I believe, was from the Janome America site. It is an elongation sample. So this uses your decorative stitches, your satin stitches in particular, and does elongation. So you can see that this would be your standard length of the stitch, and you can elongate it out to be twice as long, 3, 4, and 5 times as long.
Each of those leaves.
Each of those leaves around on this stem is the same stitch on my machine. This is the original stitch, this top one here, this tiny little leaf. That is what it will show out when you just stitch it out on the machine. And if your machine has elongation, one of the options you can do is make that stitch longer, but it keeps the density. So you can see that this stitch here, it's exactly the same stitch on my machine. I've just elongated it out. We can applique. This is a accessory of the month from a couple of years ago. This was the accessory of the month was for the ribbon and sequin foot, which is used to put the ribbon down, but we also used an F foot for doing the applique around the hexagons. And here is another sample with decorative stitching and the circle attachment. So if you want to know which foot you need for your machine, please visit your local Janome Stockist. The full list is available on our website, janome.com.au. Is our camera gone? Disappeared?
No, what
Got some weird things happening,
doing
eh?
all that focus thing.
I'll just sit still for a little while. It might focus on me. We're just adjusting our lovely camera. Good to go. If you're not sure which one you need for your particular model, please contact your local Janome store, stockist, and they'll be able to help you out with that. I hope this has given you a little bit of help with some of the feet that we've got and some of the functions or functionality that is available on your machine. And we look forward to seeing you at next month's club. Thank you very much for joining us today.